Yep. Now, Warmonger's great sword, Flamberge. In German, there was a specific word. Do you know?
I could do a
What?
quick Google research if you would like me to.
It's. I think it's called the
Oh, Zoe
Zweihander.
I can't pronounce it, but I know what you're talking about.
Hang
Zweihander.
on, let
Yeah.
me let me get this for you guys as you guys take a look. Hang on.
I think that
Uh,
they both have a similar. Yeah. Go ahead.
Flammenschwert?
What?
No, it's
No.
like Zwei Handler.
Zwei and
As
Zweihander.
Zwei.
Yep.
What? Google has failed me. Is that what you're telling me right now? Okay, all right.
Well, getting back to the.
No, Google has actually not failed you, Mr. Ubisoft man. That is actually much closer to the truth than what it is called in-game. Hey guys, welcome back to Warmonger Realism Analysis Part 2. In today's video, we're going to go over the weapons. Before we start looking at in-game models though, let's just get the elephant out of the room in the way. What is this sword called? If we're going strictly off of what the developers are saying, then it's a flamberge. Does that make any sense? I mean, no, not really. A flamberge is a characteristic for the most part. It's an adjective. There are swords that are straight or curved, and there are some swords that have a flamberge effect to them. Saying a sword is a flamberge does not describe the length or its handling. Flammenschwert was actually a pretty good description of what this is because all it's saying in German is Flammen, as in flame, so the flame effect on the sword, and Schwert, which is just sword, so flame sword. Just like Federschwert, which is feather sword. Now, if you're asking me based off of the length and the style that this sword is portrayed as, is it a Zweihander or is it a longsword? I don't want to get into the overly elaborate semantics of the situation, but essentially when we're saying Zweihander, we are specifically talking about greatswords. I understand that Zweihander means two-hander in German, but when they were coming up with the term, they didn't just place it on any sword that you could use with two hands. They were specifically talking about a sword that could only be wielded with two hands. Now there is a gray area when a longsword becomes a Zweihander or vice versa, so I'm not going to say this based off of the length, but rather of its usage. This sword in-game is wielded like a longsword. I mean, it's using our resident longsword wielder's animation, so obviously they had big similarities. Now, I'm sure Ubisoft couldn't go and say that it's another longsword because that would just seem uninspired, and they couldn't just say it was a Zweihander because it's not. So they came up with an arbitrary title for it. Honestly, it's their game and they can do whatever they want. This whole set of exposition is purely for the people who kept bickering over what the label of this weapon is. The truth is, labels are overrated and it fails at being all of them anyways, so I wouldn't look too much into it. With that out of the way, we can start looking at the in-game models for the sword, but before we do that, some generic YouTuber stuff that needs to be said first. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It costs you nothing, but it helps get these videos out to other people. If you want to see more of these videos and my regular upload schedule, hit the subscribe button to never miss a video. Now we can look at the weapons. Let's have a go at this starting from tip to butt, which means we're starting with the blades first. Like always, for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to talk about all of them, only the ones I feel that are worth mentioning. If you have any specific questions, you can leave them in the comments below, or if you have anything that you're absolutely dying to ask me, the best way to contact me is through my Discord, link in the description below. Let's start with the really simple and easy ones, with our first being the Ingame blade. This blade has two fullers that converge to the tip in a serpentine cross section. I would argue that this is not a flamberge effect at all. Usually a flamberge implies that the actual edge of the blade would have the wave effect as well. That being said, this is pretty much just a longsword blade, so I would say that this is okay, but it does suffer from the same problems that Warden's longswords have, in that this is really thick for a sword blade. Next we have what I would consider as the most comparable to a longsword blade, which is the Ifito blade. Again, we see the cross section is the only part of the blade that has a waviness to it. It also looks like we've got some sort of blade collar at the ricasso area. It's not long enough to where you could get a decent grip on it, unlike other blade types we will see. This blade is the blade that I would use if you wanted the simplest and most realistic looking sword, but you also wanted the flamberge effect to be toned down as much as possible. Now we're going to focus on blades that are less longsword-like and more Zweihander-like. Now to be clear, this doesn't mean that the blade length is the length of a Zweihander, but rather shares some aesthetic similarities to that of one. To start, we have the Marpesia blade. If it weren't for the weird cultist runes, this would by far be one of the best blades possible if you wanted your sword to look like a Zweihander. It's got a decently sized parry hooks on both sides, it's got a leather collar around the ricasso, which is also large enough to get a good grip on there, and it has a pretty decent flamberge effect that isn't too over the top. Do the runes detract from the blade at all? No, I don't think so. I do wish there were a variant without it though, but at the end of the day, it's just an aesthetic thing. Next we have the Entendre blade, and technically by association the Defiant Conspirator blade, but I'm just going to address the Entendre blade for this. I like this blade a lot because it has decent sized parry hooks, is relatively straight for the most part, and it also is just plain steel across the blade. The hooks should be further up on the Ricosta to provide more space for the hands, but she barely half swords to begin with, so it doesn't even matter. Also for the small hole in the blade itself, it's technically possible to do, but you have to be very skilled at making something like that. Especially so far down the blade because that is where all the vibrations travel down to. When you strike something, your blade makes contact at the top and the vibrations make their way down the blade and could possibly exacerbate microfractures in the steel's composition. There's a lot more blacksmithing stuff that goes into that, but that's for another time. Next I'm just mentioning the Chalcor blade because we can see pattern welded steel, or also known as Damascus steel. I always like seeing them implement this into the game, but it also looks like there are two separate components of steel that make this single blade. That's pretty weird and would probably not work for structural integrity reasons in real life. Next we are going to look at the Urlofe blade. As you can tell, we have moved away from more simple Zweihander designs and are now looking at something with no parry hooks and a much wavier blade. This sword is a bit over the top, but what it does remind me of is not a European sword at all, but rather a Southeast Asian or Filipino blade. In this case, we can use the Moro Chris as an example. The barb-like design towards the bottom and the very exaggerated waves are reminiscent of that in my opinion. Okay, we're going to move on to talking about crossguards now. Per usual, someone says that I skipped something that they wish I mentioned, so if you have any questions you can ask it down below or in Discord. Starting off with the guards, we have the Marpesia guard. This one is pretty good to start off with. It looks pretty thick, but it has a very utilitarian overall shape. The rings are very spacious enough to where you can get a thumb grip on the guard, which is a necessary technique if you want to be able to throw master cuts with your longsword. I don't know why there's a really small gap on the rings. It seems near imperceptible, especially from a distance, and it doesn't really add or take away anything having it. Overall good guard though. Next we have the Fito guard, and it is literally Anduril. Like, I don't know how they were allowed to get away with this kind of Anduril. I mean, it's a really lightweight guard and it looks like it could serve you well, so if you want that or you just really like Lord of the Rings that much, then this could be for you. Next we have the Latoria guard, and this one is an interesting design. It appears simple at first glance, and then you see the tip of each quillon has some sort of hollow design to it. I don't know how strong something like that could be on a functional sword, but it does look cool. The biggest problem I have is the D-rings are way too small. You could not possibly fit your thumb in there, and it barely sticks out to protect the rest of your hand. If the rings were a bit bigger, then I might recommend this more, but as it is, it just doesn't seem as good as the others. Next we have the Areto guard. This one is pretty neat because what we have here on the quillons is what we would call a penny scroll. It's just a fancy thing that was done to crossguards of the late medieval and Renaissance era. The quillons look perfect in my opinion, but the center of the guard is absolutely massive. I have no idea why they made it that thick, but it just looks off. Besides that, this is a pretty good guard. Next we have the Darnoa guard, and for this one it looks like another version of the penny scroll quillons, but with a bit of design punched out through it. It's pretty interesting, but it is completely overshadowed by its absolutely nonsensical rings that are on the guard. It's even way smaller than Latoria guard. It's like a meme where it says, I'm this close from losing it. Well, this guard is this close from making contact with, well, itself. I don't know why they even did this instead of just making a straight bar across, but I mean, hey, it's their game, I suppose. Next, I'm just going to quickly mention the Entendre guard. It's like the Latoria guard in the sense that it has an interesting design, could possibly be useful, but suffers from a restrictive ring that would make it difficult to wield the weapon. Next, we have the Oropata guard, and this is probably one of my favorite guards by far because it takes that very fancy Renaissance penny scroll look and just runs with it. This would look very fitting on a well-off owner of a Zweihander. The only issue I have with it is that the scrolls go into the ring, which restricts access. Now, if this was for a longsword, and technically this sword is about the length of a longsword, then it would be an issue. But if we were to assume that this is actually a Zweihander and that you wouldn't necessarily be using a thumb grip, then it could work. I only say this because 1, it's a completely different fighting style, and 2, I've seen few examples of something inside the rings themselves on Zweihanders. So that being said, this is forgivable for the most part. Next, we're going to look at the Ephesus guard, and I think this one is interesting to talk about just for the rings alone because it reminds me of the German Katzbalger, just due to the twisted guards and the fact that they don't fully connect to make a complete ring. That's about it though, just thought I'd bring it up. Last guard I'll actually talk about is the Battle Pass guard. It's not particularly historical, but it is pretty tame considering other fantasy-esque cross guards. It has a complete ring that looks very sturdy, and its quillons are leaf shaped which provide extra coverage on each side. Overall, not that bad. Now let's move on to the hilts, which comprise the grip and the pommel. To start, we're going to look at an odd one, which is the Defiant Conspirator hilt, which oddly enough has nothing to do with the Entendre hilt or any other hilt for that matter. Regardless, looking past its brutishly ostentatious color scheme, it has all the relatively basic components to be a decent hilt. It has a relatively well-sized pommel, it has a decent-sized grip with a spacer, it is a bit too round, but so are every single one of Warden's grips, so we'll just look past that. Overall not bad in my opinion, and could definitely be more uncomfortable looking I suppose. Next we have the Ingame hilt. It's a wooden grip with a wheel pommel. Not much to say past that, it should work well for what it is. What I've said before, but I might as well say again, is that wood is a good material to use because it's replaceable. In this case, wood was used in sword grips often, but would usually be wrapped in something like cord or leather, or in certain cases both. The reason why you do this is due to vibrations again, and technically overall protection of your grip. The tang runs through the wooden grip, so if it gets a hard enough shock, it could potentially damage the grip. Have you ever played baseball or cricket, or I don't know, hit a tree really hard with a stick? Do you remember getting a lot of hand shock from that and it hurting a bit? Well, imagine something like that, frequently, to something not as flexible as your fleshy hands. Next we have the Ifito hilt, and this one is very Anduro-like, but not as uncanny as the guard. That being said, it looks functional enough I suppose. Next we have the Latoria hilt, another wood grip hilt, don't need to go on that tangent again. This one looks like it has relatively small pommel though. Compared to the size of the sword, it would be a bit forward heavy, although that isn't inherently a problem. Not an overall bad hilt. Next, the Areto hilt. This one is really good. It has a grip fully wrapped in leather lace and a pommel that swoops outward, providing even more grip space. It is a quite large pommel on this one, but just like the last one, that isn't inherently a bad thing. Overall, a really great hilt and represents something that could be used on a longsword. Next, we have the Marpesia hilt, and this just might be one of the best, if not the best one. It's a fully leather wrapped hilt with a spacer in the perfect spot to allow room for both hands. It's a well-sized pommel. The overall finish looks a little worse for wear, but it's a weapon, so I mean, it is what it is. Also, you can see that it isn't completely round around the grip. It actually has an oval shape to it. Hands down, one of the best options if you're going for the most realistic build. Next, we have the Daranoa hilt, and we're getting to the point where I'm repeating myself, but repeating good things, so technically a good problem to have. The overall shape and size of the grip and pommel are good. See previous remarks for more details. Next, the Entendre hilt. This one is quite interesting because we have a flat and long pommel here. I could see this being useful to add weight to balance it while also providing extra grip space, but there are much better options than making an all flat pommel. That being said, this does seem feasible for the most part. Next we have the Urilofe hilt, and I just realized that Defiant Conspirator did just copy another set, and I didn't notice it at first. It's too much work to cut out the first part, just understand that it's essentially what I said at the beginning, but this is better because it doesn't have clown colors. Alright, that is going to wrap it up for this one. Again, if you have any questions on one that I didn't say, you can leave a comment or join my Discord and ask me. My Discord link is in the description below. Also, I know these videos have been taking a bit of time to make. To be 100% honest with you guys, with everything that's going on, it's hard to make videos. And then pair that with the fact that, as of late, to see the direction this game is going and how drip-fed the content has been this year, it's hard to stay motivated to want to get on the game. Anytime I have free time, I dread the thought of opening a Google Doc to write a script for a new video or to sit and analyze a bunch of in-game models or something like that. I've been playing this game for 3, coming on 4 years now, and I've made quite a few videos on it by this point. I want to keep doing that because everyone likes watching these videos, but it's hard when you're not motivated to do things like this, you know? I always said that making these videos can be quite hard, and by that I mean it usually takes a minimum of 15 work hours to make a video, and that's if everything goes smoothly. On some of the longer videos it would take up to 30 or 40 hours, and I have to spread it out across a week or two. So with all of that being said, Thank you for being patient with these videos. I'm going to keep making these videos if people watch them. I'm also going to make Gladiator Part 3 at some point. Don't know when. I'd like to thank the people who become members, even though times are tough right now and I don't always upload content that often. I still appreciate it. I also appreciate the people who just watch these videos. You guys are the reason I make them. Anyways, like and subscribe, all the other generic YouTuber stuff. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them down below, and I hope you have a great day. Peace.